The first thing I noticed about Willowbrook Estates wasn't the manicured lawns or the rows of pastel houses lined up like soldiers. It was the silence. Not peaceful silence, the brittle, watchful kind that settles over a neighborhood where people pull their curtains shut instead of waving hello. My tires crunched over the cobblestone drive, still warm from the late August sun, when a glint of neon appeared in my side mirror. A woman in a lime green tracksuit, hair scraped into a perfect helmet of blonde, was power walking toward me with the intensity of a debt collector. Designer heels clicked against the pavement, each step landing like a judgment. I hadn't even killed the engine on my pickup when she slapped something under my wiper blade. A crisp envelope with embossed lettering. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she announced, her voice sugary and sharp all at once. "Unfortunately, you're already in violation." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You can't park a commercial vehicle in a residential zone," she said, gesturing to the faded decals still clinging to my door. "Phoenix Property Solutions. You'll need to pay the $500 fine within 48 hours. I stepped out of the truck, sweat and diesel fumes clinging to my shirt from the 1,200-mile drive. "Ma'am, this isn't a commercial vehicle. It's my personal truck." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The rules are clear." She pulled out a clipboard stacked with violation forms. Not just one, but an entire arsenal. Mailbox paint chipped. Lawn edging uneven. Doormat unapproved. She ticked them off like a grocery list. I hadn't even unpacked my toothbrush, and already I owed over $2,000. The woman's perfume hung in the heavy air, cloying and expensive. Her name tag, because of course she had one, Red D. Pickering, HOA president. Somewhere behind lace curtains, I caught movement, a neighbor watching. When I raised a hand in a friendly wave, the curtains snapped shut. Another man, washing his car down the block, suddenly became very interested in his tire pressure. This wasn't just enforcement. It was theater, and every resident was an unwilling audience. "I'll need your signature acknowledging these fines," Pickering said, thrusting the clipboard toward me like a sword. I studied her face for a beat too long. The way she scanned me up and down, measuring, cataloging, dismissing, told me this wasn't about a chipped mailbox. It was about control. "Funny thing," I said, my voice even. "I've spent 20 years managing properties. I read a lot of fine print for a living." Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before settling back into that saccharine smile. "Then you'll know how important it is to comply." I took the envelope, folded it once, and tucked it into my jacket. "I'll make sure these get the attention they deserve." Pickering turned on her heel and strutted off, camera swinging from her neck. Every few steps, she paused to photograph my rose bushes, my front walk, even the way the gravel sat against the curb, like she was documenting a crime scene. By the time she disappeared into a gleaming white BMW, I'd already made two decisions. First, I wasn't paying a cent of her bogus fines. Second, I was going to find out why everyone on this street looked so terrified of a woman who smelled like overpriced lotion and fake authority. The house key was still warm from the lawyer's envelope when I stepped inside my great-aunt Millicent's home, a sturdy brick place that smelled faintly of old paper and rosewater. She'd raised 3 kids here after her husband died in Vietnam, worked double shifts at the diner, and still found time to fix neighbors' cars for free. She'd fought her HOA until her last breath. The lawyer warned me there were ongoing disputes, but I hadn't imagined I'd be ambushed before I even unpacked. On the kitchen counter, Millicent's recipe box sat where she'd left it, neat as ever. Apple pie, pot roast, and something heavier tucked between the cards. A key. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting the quiet street in gold. Behind every drawn curtain, someone was watching, waiting. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the envelope of fines. "All right, Aunt Millie," I murmured. "Let's see what kind of fight you left me." Somewhere down the block, an engine started, the faint purr of a BMW. I didn't even have to look. I knew who it was, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, the neighborhood looked different in daylight. Neat hedges, fresh asphalt, a community pool glinting like glass under the Colorado sun. But beneath the polished surface, something fell off. I walked the block with a cup of coffee, just trying to shake off the fatigue of a 1,200-mile drive. The same curtains twitched. The same silence followed me like a shadow. Across the street, an older woman kneeling in her flower bed glanced up, smiled faintly, then seemed to think better of it. She lowered her gaze and busied herself with the soil. Fear, sharp and unspoken, hung in the air. When I reached my mailbox, I found another envelope waiting. This one was certified. The fee had jumped from $2,100 to $2,875 overnight. Administrative processing and late penalties, the notice read in fine print. I laughed out loud. Overnight. That's when I realized this wasn't just intimidation. This was precision work, a system built to grind people down fast. The lawyer who handled my great-aunt's estate had mentioned tensions with the HOA, but what I found in the county records that afternoon made tensions sound like a picnic. If hell has a waiting room, it looks like the Jefferson County Recorder's office. Fluorescent lights that make you look like you haven't slept in a week, and clerks who treat every question like you just asked them to donate a kidney. But buried in the dusty files was gold. Willowbrook Estates' original covenants were 12 pages of common-sense rules written in 1983. The version being enforced now? 47 pages of micro-dictatorship, with rules about seasonal decorations, the angle of driveway cracks, even the acceptable number of visible children's toys. I'd managed shopping centers with less regulation. But here was the kicker. There were no voting records approving these changes. No homeowner signatures. No paper trail at all. Whoever rewrote these rules had done it behind closed doors. Back on my street, I saw the same woman from earlier, the one in the garden, standing near my driveway. Her hands trembled as she held a manila folder. "You're asking questions about the HOA?" she whispered, eyes darting toward the cul-de-sac. "Good. Someone needs to." Her name was Gladys, 78 years old, a retired librarian with a backbone stronger than her voice suggested. She pressed the folder into my hand like she was passing state secrets. "Keep it hidden," she murmured. "She has people watching." Inside were photographs, meeting notes, even hand-drawn maps. 12 households fined into submission. 3 elderly residents forced to sell their homes at prices far below market. And every one of those properties, I noticed, had been listed by a single real estate broker. Deardra Pickering. I looked up just as the white BMW crept around the corner. Not speeding, cruising, watching. That night, I pored over the folder at Millicent's kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, but I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I glanced out the window, nothing but darkness and the glow of the street lamp. Still, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. At 2 a.m., footsteps crunched across the gravel outside. I killed the kitchen light and peered through the blinds. The BMW rolled past slowly, headlights dimmed. Behind it, a shadow moved along my fence line. By morning, my mailbox was tagged with spray paint, just meaningless squiggles, but placed with surgical precision right where Pickering had photographed it the day before. On the porch sat a neat pile of dog waste, like someone had gift-wrapped contempt. The security cameras I'd installed yesterday captured everything, including Chad, Pickering's boyfriend, skulking across my lawn like a discount spy. This wasn't random harassment. This was a campaign. And it wasn't just me. Gladys wasn't exaggerating. These people lived in fear. A single mom cited for excessive children's toys. A Vietnam vet fined because his flagpole leaned 2 degrees off vertical. A widow told her garden gnome violated community aesthetics. Every story pointed to the same pattern. Target the vulnerable, bury them in fines, take their homes. That night, I set Millicent's recipe box on the table again. Between the apple pie and pot roast cards, I found a tiny brass key I'd noticed before. A safety deposit box number was etched on the tag, one I didn't recognize. "Millie," I muttered under my breath. "What were you keeping from them?" Outside, the BMW passed again, engine humming low. Not stopping, just reminding me it was there. This wasn't about chipped mailboxes anymore. This was war. And I had just decided to stop playing defense. 2 days later, I was back at the county offices, clutching a coffee that tasted more like cardboard than caffeine, waiting for the vault clerk to return with the safety deposit box tied to Millicent's mysterious key. When she placed the metal container on the counter, it was lighter than I expected. No gold bars, no secret deeds. Just a manila envelope stuffed with papers and a small voice recorder wrapped in a faded handkerchief. The first page was written in Millicent's careful handwriting. Marcus, if you're reading this, it means Deardra Pickering is still running the HOA. She's stealing from us, from everyone. I've gathered what I could, but I'm too old to fight her. Maybe you aren't. My chest tightened. I'd barely had time to grieve, and now here was proof my aunt had spent her last months battling the same woman who slapped me with fines before I unpacked. The documents were meticulous. Bank statements, meeting minutes, copies of falsified signatures on covenant amendments that no one had ever voted on. And the voice recorder. When I pressed play, Millicent's voice crackled through, steady but tired. She thinks we're all too scared to stand up to her, she said. But people forget. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty. If she's misusing funds, she can lose everything. Hold on to this, Marcus. If anything happens to me, make sure someone does what I couldn't. I left the vault with the envelope under my arm and a storm in my gut. This wasn't just harassment. This was theft. Organized, deliberate, and cruel. By the time I got home, a city code enforcement truck was parked outside my house. The officer, polite, embarrassed, explained someone had filed a complaint about an abandoned commercial vehicle. He inspected my perfectly legal pickup, apologized, and left. But the message was clear. Pickering wasn't letting up. 2 hours later, the contractor licensing board called. Someone accused me of running an unlicensed business out of my home. 5 minutes into the call, the investigator realized it was nonsense. But 2 complaints in one morning told me this wasn't random. That night, the BMW didn't just cruise by. It stopped. I sat in the dark living room, watching through the blinds as Chad got out, scanning my porch with a flashlight. The security cameras caught him pacing along my fence, snapping photos. Something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, something deeper. A cold clarity. For 20 years, I'd managed properties, dealt with dishonest tenants, crooked vendors, even the occasional scammer. But this was different. This was personal. The next morning, I invited Gladys over for coffee. She came carrying another folder, this one twice as thick as the first. I've been documenting her for 2 years, she said, voice trembling with both fear and pride. She fined Mrs. Rodriguez for a flag, pushed the Hendersons out over a mailbox, and she's been funneling HOA contracts to her nephew and that boyfriend of hers. I flipped through invoices, $3,000 a month for landscaping that amounted to mowing postage stamp lawns twice a month, $800 for pool maintenance when the pool looked like a science experiment. Legal fees triple what any HOA this size should ever pay. She's bleeding this neighborhood dry, I muttered. Gladys leaned in. You're the only one who can stop her. You have the experience, and people are ready to follow you. They're just scared. I looked at her, at this 78-year-old woman who'd stood up to a petty tyrant with nothing but a pen and librarian's precision, and I realized something. I'd come here to settle my own life after losing my job, my house, my marriage. But this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was Millicent's. It was Gladys's. It was every neighbor too afraid to open their blinds. That evening, as the sun bled over the Rockies, I walked door to door. A Vietnam vet named Bob. A single mom named Sophia. Even Pastor Williams from the little church down the street. Each had a story of harassment, fines, or threats. And each one, when they saw the evidence I carried, agreed to stand with me. By the time the BMW rolled past again, its tinted windows watching, I was no longer just one man with a truck and a file of documents. I was leading a neighborhood ready to fight. And Deardra Pickering didn't know it yet, but the rules she thought she controlled were about to turn against her. Within a week, my dining room stopped looking like a place to eat and started looking like a war room. Great Aunt Millicent's table was buried under bankers' boxes, photographs, and color-coded files. Red string connected faces to invoices. Legal pads overflowed with notes. The smell of coffee never really left the air. Neighbors trickled in one by one, hesitant at first, then emboldened when they realized they weren't alone. Gladys brought cookies and 30 years of librarian discipline. Sophia, the single mom, brought her paralegal skills and a laptop full of case law. Bob, the Vietnam vet, showed up with a beer and an engineer's eye for infrastructure fraud. This road work she claims we paid for, Bob said, tapping a stack of invoices. Never happened. I can prove it. The room buzzed with quiet purpose. For the first time, I saw these people not as victims, but as allies. Ordinary neighbors becoming something stronger. But Deardra Pickering wasn't sitting still. 2 mornings later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, hat in hand. "Mr. Hartwell, we got a report that you threatened the HOA president," he said. "Mind if I come in?" "Sure," I replied, motioning to the cameras mounted above my porch. "I've got footage of where I was and what I didn't say." He reviewed the tape, shook his head. "Figured as much. But I need to file this. Word of advice? Document everything. This is going to get worse before it gets better." He wasn't kidding. Anonymous complaints kept rolling in to the DMV, the licensing board, even my old employer. My truck was vandalized twice. Someone spray-painted "Outsider" across the hood in dripping black letters. But the moment that really hit me wasn't about property damage. It was the letter. Buried in Millicent's papers was one she'd written just 2 weeks before her heart gave out. The ink wavered in places where her hand must have trembled. "Marcus, I'm tired. They're trying to break me. But I can't let them take this neighborhood from the people who built it. If you're reading this, fight for them. Please. For me." I sat there in her kitchen long after the sun went down, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Grief mixed with anger, a bitter alloy in my chest. This wasn't about mailbox paint or fines anymore. This was about Millicent and every neighbor she'd try to protect. The next morning, I made a decision. No more waiting for Deardra to make her next move. Sophia drew up legal requests for the HOA's financial records. "They have to comply," she said. "If they don't, we go to court. We serve them in person." Deardra's reaction was pure theater. Tight smile, fake sympathy, eyes hard as glass. "You're wasting your time," she hissed. But the cracks were showing. The forensic accountant Sophia found traced over $300,000 in community improvement funds that simply didn't exist, payments to shell companies linked to Deardra's family and friends. Millicent's voice recordings matched the paper trail perfectly. And then came the real bombshell. Bob's contact at the county utilities office discovered that the property included mineral rights, small gas royalties worth $18,000, money that should have gone to Millicent and instead had been rerouted to the HOA's general fund, with Deardra as the only signatory. The pressure cooker was hissing. Deardra struck back by calling an emergency HOA meeting, trying to rush a foreclosure vote on my property. But only 3 board members showed, not enough for a legal quorum. When Gladys stood up mid-meeting, voice shaking but clear, and quoted HOA law chapter and verse, Deardra's mask cracked. She screamed at her, threatened fines, even tried to order her out. The neighbors saw it. They didn't hide behind curtains anymore. They were starting to believe this fight could be won. But late that night, standing on my porch, I heard tires crunching on gravel. The BMW again, slow, deliberate. This time it stopped in my driveway. Chad stepped out carrying a flashlight and something heavier bulging under his jacket. "You're making this hard on yourself," he said, voice low. "Pay the fines. Leave it alone." I didn't flinch. "Tell Deardra I'm not scared of her." He smirked, then leaned close. "Maybe you should be." The threat hung in the night, ere long after the car pulled away. I watched the taillights disappear, heart pounding, not in fear, but in something sharper. This wasn't just corruption anymore. It was desperation, and desperate people make dangerous moves. The annual HOA meeting was 2 weeks away. It would either be the day we took our neighborhood back, or the day Deardra crushed anyone who dared stand against her. I'd never been more certain or more determined. The community center buzzed with a tension you could taste, sharp as copper on the tongue. By 7 in the morning, folding chairs scraped against linoleum as neighbors crowded into the room, shoulder to shoulder. Some brought thermoses of coffee. Others brought their kids, their spouses, their courage. Local news cameras lined the back wall. A reporter from Denver adjusted her mic, scanning the crowd like she smelled a story, and she did. I stood near the door, evidence binder under my arm, heart steady. Not calm, just steady, the kind of focus I remembered from my military days, right before mission went live. When Deardra Pickering arrived, she didn't slink in. She made an entrance. Navy blazer, pearl necklace, briefcase clutched like a weapon. Chad and 3 relatives trailed her, wearing 4 scowls. She climbed onto the small stage and seized the microphone. "We're here today," she said, voice syrupy, "to address threats against this community and remove the source of disruption." Every eye turned toward me. I stepped forward slowly, the binder heavy in my hand. "Before you do that," I said, "let's talk about where our money went." Her smile tightened. "This isn't the time." Gladys's voice cut her off, sharp and clear from the front row. "Point of order. Under Colorado HOA law, members have a right to speak before any vote is taken." The room rippled with murmurs, and even the cameraman leaned closer. Deardra tried to gavel her down, a gavel she had no authority to use, but the sound was swallowed by voices rising in support. "Let him speak," someone shouted. "We've had enough." I climbed the steps, laid the binder on the podium, and opened it. Inside, Millicent's recordings, forged covenant amendments, bank transfers funneled through shell companies, invoices to relatives for work that never happened. "Over $400,000, I said, my voice carrying over the restless crowd. "Stolen from every homeowner in this room. And here's the proof." I flipped the pages one by one, projecting them onto a portable screen Sophia had set up. The numbers didn't lie. Neither did the photographs of a pool left filthy while maintenance drained $800 a month, or roads billed as repaired but never touched. A gasp rolled through the room as I played Millicent's voice. "She's stealing from us. Someone has to stop her." Deardra lunged for the mic. "Lies. Forged documents. He's an outsider." I hit play on the last recording. The room went silent except for her own voice, captured in crystal clarity just 3 nights ago. I was just being creative with the accounting. "These people don't understand. They're sheep. They need someone to make decisions for them." The words echoed off the walls like a gunshot. Neighbors who'd been afraid to open their curtains now stood, fists clenched, shouting, "You lied to us. Where's our money?" An elderly man in the back wept openly, and his daughter wrapped an arm around his shaking shoulders. Deardra's face drained of color, then flushed an ugly red. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed. "He's trying to destroy this neighborhood." "Funny," I said quietly. "My great-aunt thought you were the one destroying it. And she died fighting you." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, not in uniform this time, but with a badge from the state's Financial Crimes Unit. 2 agents flanked him. "Ms. Pickering," he said, voice level, "we need you to come with us. You're under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." The room erupted. Some clapped, some shouted. Others just stared in stunned silence as she staggered backward, clutching her briefcase like it could shield her. "Chad, try to block the agents." "You can't just..." Rodriguez held up a warrant. "We can, and we are." The cameras caught every second. Deardra screaming about conspiracies as she was let out, pearls swinging, heels scraping the floor. I turned back to the neighbors, throat tight. "This isn't about me. This is about all of us. And starting today, no one here has to live in fear of their own community." The standing ovation wasn't polite. It was thunder, years of frustration breaking loose, echoing off the walls like freedom itself. For the first time since I'd arrived, Willowbrook Estates felt alive. And Deardra Pickering's reign of fear was finished. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates didn't feel like the same neighborhood. The lawns were still neat, the roses still bloomed, but the silence had changed. No more curtains snapping shut when you walked by. No more fearful glances over hedges. Kids rode bikes down the street, laughing, instead of hiding their toys from inspectors. People actually waved when you passed. Not because they felt safe, but because they were safe. The HOA fees dropped nearly in half after we voted in a new board. Turns out honest management costs less than corruption. We used the recovered funds to actually fix the streets, hire a real landscaping company, and cleaned the community pool for the first time in years. The water sparkled, so clear it looked like it belonged on a postcard. Deardra Pickering pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and forgery. Her boyfriend Chad went down with her. The court seized their accounts, their shell companies, even that white BMW she used to stalk the neighborhood. Last I heard, she was trading her pearls for prison khakis. But the victory didn't feel like revenge. It felt like relief, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. I stood in my great-aunt Millicent's garden on a quiet Sunday morning, trimming the roses she'd planted decades ago. The memorial plaque we'd placed beside the path caught the sun just right. Millie's garden, for those who stood tall when others were silenced. Gladys joined me, holding a tray of cookies as usual. "You know," she said, eyes twinkling behind those oversized glasses, "I think your aunt would be proud." "She'd tell us to quit talking and get back to work," I said, smiling. Sophia's kids darted past, chasing a soccer ball. Bob waved from the street, on his way to a committee meeting about the new playground. For the first time, this place felt like a community, not a battlefield. But the fight left its mark. Some neighbors still startled when a car idled too long outside. Others still checked their mailboxes with a nervous glance. Fear takes time to unlearn. I took a slow breath, remembering Millicent's voice on that old recorder. Tired, steady, determined. Someone has to stop her. Maybe you can. We'd stopped her. But more than that, we'd learned how to stand up together. The local news called it the HOA rebellion, and now other neighborhoods were reaching out. I'd started a consulting firm almost by accident, helping communities audit their books, hold their boards accountable, and rebuild trust. Turns out people will pay good money for someone who knows how to spot a scam before it swallows their street. But this was personal. That evening, as the sun sank behind the Rockies, I walked the block one last time. Not to check for threats or track a white BMW, but just to see the glow of porch lights, hear the sound of neighbors talking on driveways. The air smelled like barbecue, not fear. At Millicent's grave, I laid a single rose. One of hers, pruned from the garden she fought to protect. The wind stirred the branches overhead, carrying the faint hum of laughter from down the street. "You did it, Aunt Millie," I murmured. "You kept them safe. I just followed your map." A soft rustle behind me. Gladys again, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one over without a word, and for a while we stood there in silence. "You think it's over?" she asked finally. I shook my head. People like her always pop up somewhere. But now we know what to do. As we walked back, I glanced at the houses glowing warm in the twilight. Willowbrook Estates wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it belonged to its people again. Not to fear, not to greed, not to one woman's hunger for control. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet street where kids can play, where neighbors share coffee instead of whispered warnings, where a garden blooms because no one's afraid to tend it. I looked once more at Millicent's roses, glowing in the dusk like embers of something that wouldn't burn out. "Rest easy," I said softly. "We're home."